Every modern mega cruise ship is built on this incredible contradiction. It's an idea so extreme, it almost sounds like it shouldn't work. On one hand, you've got this serene, floating luxury resort, but deep down, just below your feet, it is something else entirely. Just a few decks below those quiet swimming pools and silent hallways, there's a 100,000 horsepower power plant just screaming at over 120 decibels. I mean, we're talking about a full-blown heavy industrial factory, and it's running 24/7. And yet somehow the guests on board, they experience none of it. And that right there, that's the ultimate magic trick. So how in the world do engineers pull it off? How do they disguise a massive, roaring factory as a peaceful vacation spot? Well, that's what we're going to break down, and the solution is a total masterclass in modern engineering. To really get the solution, you first have to understand the core problem. And the problem is this. Every single one of these megaships is basically two completely different vessels, both fighting to exist inside the very same steel hull. This is the central challenge for the engineers, right? I mean, it's one thing to power a city, and it's another thing entirely to push a massive object through the water. But to do both of those things simultaneously with the same power source, well, that creates a huge conflict. And you can think of that conflict as a constant, brutal tug of war for the ship's energy. Every minute of every day, two gigantic forces are competing for every last megawatt of power that ship can possibly produce. On one side of the rope, you've got propulsion. Pushing something that weighs more than 3 aircraft carriers through the ocean takes an almost unimaginable amount of force. But on the other side, you've got what engineers call the hotel load, and that's everything else needed to keep that floating city running. And don't underestimate that hotel load. It's enormous. We're talking about perfectly air conditioning thousands upon thousands of rooms, running huge industrial kitchens around the clock, powering these massive Broadway-style theaters, and even desalinating millions of gallons of seawater to make fresh drinking water. If you fail at any of this, the whole resort experience just collapses. Now, back in the day, older ships had a much simpler but way more rigid solution. The engines were just physically bolted to these giant steel drive shafts that turn the propellers. If you wanted to go faster, you just revved the engines harder. Simple, right? But that system is incredibly inefficient for a modern ship that has constantly changing energy needs. So engineers came up with a truly revolutionary solution. They basically threw out that old, rigid system and replaced it with something way more elegant and flexible. They created what you can think of as a liquid power grid. Here's the core concept, and it's genius. In a modern diesel-electric system, those massive engines deep in the hull, they're not connected to the propellers at all. Instead, they just act as giant electrical generators, creating raw power and feeding it into one central, intelligent grid. The result is that instead of a stiff mechanical connection, you have this incredibly flexible, dynamic, liquid pool of energy. A central computer can now direct that power wherever it's needed most, second by second. So, for instance, during the day when the ship is racing to its next port, the grid funnels massive voltage down to the propulsion pods to get maximum speed. But at night, when the ship slows down, that power isn't just wasted. The grid is smart. It seamlessly reroutes all that excess energy to the hotel side, for the casinos, the theaters, all the overnight operations. It's incredibly efficient. But this elegant solution created a brand new and very physical problem. Because when you concentrate this much power generation in one place, you get a massive and potentially trip-ruining side effect. I mean, you can't escape the laws of physics. When you have engines the size of a small building, creating that much energy, all of that immense mechanical action, it has to go somewhere. And that byproduct is violent vibration. These engines literally want to shake themselves and everything around them completely apart. We are talking about immense, structure-rattling levels of vibration. And if that vibration transfers into the steel frame of the ship, it'll travel all the way up into the guest cabins, right into the penthouse suites. The magic trick would be over. The illusion of a peaceful resort, completely shattered. So to stop this from happening, engineers had to come up with one last brilliant trick. They had to find a way to completely isolate this roaring factory from the rest of the ship. They had to figure out how to make the entire power plant float. And they did it with this really cool multi-layered system. See, the massive generators don't sit directly on the ship's hull. First, they're mounted on these giant custom-made rubber dampeners. Then, that entire assembly is mounted on a set of heavy-duty pneumatic shock absorbers, kind of like what you'd find on a massive industrial truck. And the result of this system is incredible. The engines are allowed to shake like crazy, but all that energy gets absorbed by the dampeners and the shock absorbers before it can ever touch the ship's steel frame. In effect, the entire power plant is floating inside the hull. It really is a masterclass. It's a solution that's so simple in its concept, right? Just absorb the shaking, but unbelievably complex to actually execute. And this brings us right back to the magic trick. Because of this whole hidden system, the guest experiences none of that industrial chaos happening below. All they feel is the final product, a quiet room, a cool breeze from the AC, and just a smooth, gentle glide across the water. So the next time you're on a cruise ship, just take a moment and appreciate the silence. Because the fact that you never ever have to think about that roaring machine just a few decks below your feet, well, that's the ultimate proof that this incredible hidden system is working absolutely perfectly.